I'm so excited to be here, and I am so excited for all the people who I've worked with in the past or LinkedIn with recently who are here. So thank you for coming, guys. I'm Colleen Tarto. I'm Director of Engineering here at Starburst Data in Boston. I say here like we're in an office. Of course, we're not. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our company. I'm going to let Jess jump in too. Starburst is a Presto SQL company. Starburst Data, although she just disappeared, so maybe she really doesn't want to jump in. Well, there she is. We enable people to run fast analytics on their data in their own existing architecture without building a ton of data pipelines and connecting direct. We allow people to connect directly to the data at the source. I love our product. I'm so excited to work at our company. We have an enterprise Presto SQL product, and it's really incredible. My team is building Presto as a service, which is awesome. And we've got some really exciting growth. We announced our Series B funding round a few months ago. And obviously data is a super hot market if you've followed any of this recent news. And what we're building is like a real game changer. So I'm very excited to work here. In the engineering org, I'm hiring full stack engineers. We're hiring SREs, Kubernetes engineers, engineering managers, backend engineers for core Presto. And I'm sure Jess has a bunch of people she's hiring too. Diversity is very important to us. We are excited about creating and building an inclusive and equitable culture. I literally just told our CEO, I was like, hey, read Brotopia. And he ordered it and he's reading it. And I'm so excited. So it is very important to us. So please contact me if you're looking for a new gig or if you just want to chat. We'd love to talk to you. Jess, did I miss anything? Can I join the marketing team? No. You have to click mic on. Jess, no, she can't hear. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just assume that I can join the marketing team now. So we're working on some technical difficulties. And I hope everyone is going to vote next week. I know we are rebranded to She Votes Out. This is the big election for our lives. So please vote. 2 weeks away. Yes. Yay. I love it. People voted. I actually just dropped my ballot off yesterday. So, all right. Sad Jess isn't here because a lot of this does hinge on Jess. So, let's see. Okay. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. But, our goal for this panel is to help women understand, women and everybody, but this is She Geeks Out. So mostly women understand what it means to be strategic and how that affects career progression and overcoming common barriers to being in a strategic role. And this is a particularly timely topic because recent research has actually shown that the pandemic in particular has been horrible for women's career progressions. So, what we want to do tonight is focus on specific actions and concrete plans for people to take in their careers to become more strategic and make sure that your contributions propel you forward to those strategic roles. So one of those big barriers is whether or not a woman is perceived as strategic. And Jess wrote an incredible article on what she calls She's Not Strategic Syndrome, or SNS. And often women focus so much on executing and driving results that they get labeled as operational and really good at execution, but not good at strategy. And it's a little bit of that, working twice as hard to get half as far. It's a little bit of everything. And it's really an unfair perception. And so this panel, we're hoping, can help women increase your strategic contribution and move into leadership roles that you're looking for. So while we're waiting for Jess, I'm going to start off by asking both Lily and Bhuvana. So we'll start with Bhuvana. What does it mean to you to be strategic? What does that actually mean?
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah.
Actually, wait, sorry. I didn't let you introduce yourselves. That's the horrible of me. I'm so sorry. I'm so rude.
No,
please start by introducing yourself. And
sure, happy to do so. My name is Bhuvana Hussain. I am a senior director at Grubhub. So hopefully many people are familiar with Grubhub and you use it to order your food. Obviously, we're doing all that we can to help the restaurant industry survive in these crazy times, and enabling them to get more orders through and serve more hungry diners. So I'll stop with that part. um, and Colleen, just in terms of order, do you want me to answer the question, or should we have Lily introduce herself?
Actually, I was going to ask, so you're senior director of what exactly? Like, what do you do day to day?
Yeah, so I do some product and technology operations. And it's funny that you were talking about being labeled operational because it's something I have to deal with every day to show that what I do operationally is also a leadership role and is not just tactical, right? And so I think to answer your question about what it means to be strategic, I think for me, a lot of it boils down to one of the key parts of Jess's article, which is fantastic. I recommend everybody read it. But one of the key parts that I've observed in my career is making sure that your strategic contributions are known, right? I think that that's something I know I have fallen in the trap of, okay, I'm going to put my head down and execute, and my results will speak for themselves and people will notice. And it just doesn't work that way, right? So many people are so busy, especially at leadership levels, that it's really key to, I think, to say, hey, this strategic contribution here, I did this, right? Asking this particular question about business value and redirecting our efforts to something that delivers better results. I helped with that. And it's a really tricky thing to do. I know we're going to get into it more later in the panel, so I'll pause there.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I think that's a great definition of strategery. What was it? Strategery. Jess, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm having really spotty Wi-Fi, so I'm sorry about this. I did put myself in work bar thinking this would be better than home, but hopefully you can hear me. So I'll do a super quick introduction. Hopefully you won't lose me. But I'm Jess. Hopefully you guys had a chance to read the article. I really appreciate any feedback that has come my way, and I'm really excited that it sparked some conversation. I've had a pretty good run in my career in tech, and I am right now the CMO of Starburst Data. Loving this experience so far, and I've been really lucky along my career to have had supportive employers who have let me speak out on topics that I think are really important regarding women in tech. So that's my quick intro.
Yes. And we were also, I can't get over your nail color, which it's our new colors for our new brand. So looks really good. So yeah, so I was also asking, what is strategy? Like how do you define being strategic? You're on mute still. Can she not hear me? Oh no. Yes. All right. So Lily, let's move on to you. If you could introduce yourself and then also just talk about what it means for you to be strategic.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. My name is Lily. I'm currently a product designer at Facebook. Specifically, I work on Messenger and Instagram DMs. And this is maybe the first public event that I've spoken to where I can actually talk about what I work on because we actually launched yesterday. So we basically launched the ability to have conversations between your Instagram and Messenger account for the first time. And so that is literally what I work on, and I'm so happy to be able to say that. Before this, I have been a designer for a number of years, from doing freelancing to startups to agency work. So I have a fair breadth of experience as a designer, and I will certainly be answering all of your questions, caveating that is from a designer's point of view. I did a quick peek at everyone's profiles before this to see if there was any designer in the crew, but I didn't see anyone explicitly say that they were. So I hope that everyone will just generalize what I say because I hope that it is still relevant. But to answer your question about what it's like to be strategic or what does it mean to be strategic, I think that design as an industry kind of suffers that problem twofold because design has historically struggled to be perceived as strategic. The biggest myth that people have is that design is just pixels on a screen and that designers make everything look pretty. But very recently, we've finally been able to enjoy this broader understanding that design is actually the product. It determines the way that people understand the product, the way that the product works, and how users perceive the value and make the most of the products. So it's gotten to the point that fortunately product strategy is actually a core competency for product designers. And so I'm very glad that we've gotten to this point. There's still a tiny bit of work left to do. So we do have kind of that type of strategic struggle. And then the other side being that design is a field that is made up of nearly half of women. And I think we lost Colleen.
Keep going, Lily. It sounds great.
Okay. Design is made up of, I believe, more than half women, but women only have about 11% of the leadership positions inside of design. So we certainly do struggle in the sense that for the limited strategic roles that you get, once you do get higher up in design, women don't take up a lot of them.
Yeah, and I think design is such an important strategic piece of the puzzle. Like, that's why I'm so excited you're here to give us that perspective on it. So so I think the crux of the question here is really like, how can you get better at your strategic game? So like, now that we understand what it means to be strategic, I guess actually let's back up for a second. How can you tell whether you're strategic or if you even want to become strategic? Because I think in Jess's article, especially, we'll keep coming back to that. So everybody should read it after the fact. But really, it talks about how some people aren't strategic. Some people are rooted in operations and they're so good at execution and operations, and that's okay too. That's a really important function. But how do you know whether you want to be strategic or whether you are strategic? Bhuvana, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start with that. So I totally agree with you in terms of some people having a really good strength area in operations and in optimization of operations. And that type of role and skill set can be incredibly valuable. So it's certainly not to downplay it, and not everybody needs or wants to be strategic. But I think one of the things I've noticed in my career is that advancing and kind of making your way into larger decision-making conversations or more critical prioritization conversations, it almost requires showing that you're strategic, right? And for me, sometimes trying to figure out if I'm strategic has literally involved asking people, right? Do I seem to be strategic? And it's tough because I think women are often told they're not strategic, but it's code for something else that they need to work on. And I know we're going to go into some of that later, but I think that there's it's unfortunately become a little bit of an umbrella term in terms of feedback, when it's really some other critical pieces of how women present themselves that is causing this perception that they're not strategic.
Dare I ask if Jess can hear us?
I tethered, so ladies, I might actually be I can see you all now. I can hear, so sorry about that.
Dude, computers are hard, man.
Phones are hard, computers are hard. I had personal tech support, whatever. Let's roll.
So we've been talking about, well, we define strategic and what that means. And I think it's really centered on business value and being able to loop your function back up to the goals of the business and being able to set direction in that way. So I was going to ask Lily next. I am going to get back to you, Lily, but I want to get Jess while she can hear me. So how do you know if you are strategic, Jess? Or, how can you tell whether you are strategic or if you even want to become strategic?
One of my sort of advantages is the career path I've been on, starting with product marketing and starting with market research and analysis. That gave me a foundation to be contributing to the strategy for my core job. So that's one thing to baseline. And I was always interested in market research, how to analyze it, how to spot trends, and then maybe how to develop messaging and positioning related to that. So I think that I feel like if I look at my background, even as early as college, I was heading down this path of being in a role that was leadership oriented, but certainly helping companies figure out how to grow through new markets, new audiences, new regions, et cetera. So I think for me, it was a little bit part of my DNA, but you don't have to have that path to be strategic. And I think that you need to ask yourself, do you want to make a big impact on the organization? And that's what being strategic is. It's about helping organizations navigate, finding new opportunities to grow, finding new ways to stand out and differentiate your product or service, finding new ways to optimize the business. There's so many ways that you can be strategic inside an organization. So it doesn't have to be my path. And if that fuels you, you should try to find the right path that works for you to become more strategic. And if you are completely excited about operating and killing goals that are set for you and doing an awesome job at that, completely fine. That means you want to be focused on operations, and that's okay. And there are strategic levers there too. So I know that's a long answer, but I think across the board, there's a lot of opportunity to become more strategic if you are fueled by that idea of making a very broad impact on the business. But it's okay to not want that path. And being a leader is not all it's chalked up to be. It's very hard. So
there's a lot
worth considering all of your options.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more risk. And I can definitely see some overlap between what Bhuvanas said and what you're saying. So, Lily, first of all, I upgraded my Instagram Messenger yesterday. So thank you for producing an awesome, beautiful product. So well done.
Thank you.
What's your take on it? So I feel like you're coming at it from a different angle. What do you think about, how do you know if you're strategic as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I kind of want to bring this thing that someone said from my startup days. And this hopefully is not relevant only within a startup, but we used to say that if someone walks into a meeting that you're actively contributing to and they can't tell what your role is, that's a really good sign that you're strategic, because conversations around strategy isn't scoped to a single discipline. You can be a designer and you can be talking about KPIs and data and prioritization without showing a single mock. And so that's just kind of one way that, personally I've thought about it. But you're right. I do also come from it from, the product / design side. And it almost makes me want to say that you kind of have to be strategic sometimes to advance in that area, because again, like I mentioned, design is the product, and product means that there's strategy involved. Every decision should be intentional. Nothing should be on the screen in a certain way unintentionally. And so again, it could be unique to this field, but I certainly encourage, juniors and mentees to get strategic as early on as possible, because it's so underestimated. And, the sooner that you're able to tie your decisions to the bottom line of the company, the more you're going to be able to grow, especially early on.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I feel like that's the whole ball game too. So how do you, this is the title of the panel too. So how do you up your strategic game? What are some specific resources that are out there to sort of level up to see the business across functions? And what actions can anyone take to get more strategic? I don't know who wants to start on this one. Jess unmuted herself, so let's start.
I'll start. I think that sometimes there can be a lack of transparency from the top down in any organization on what are our goals and how are we achieving, how are we progressing to achieve them. So you're always able to ask your manager, can you talk to me about the goals? Or you can ask people above, talk to me about how we are doing against our goals. What are we seeing as our opportunities to improve and grow? What are we seeing as our core challenges? Ask questions about the health of the business, and then think about what are possible solutions for that. So I think that that's the easiest path. Is it allows you to express that you're interested in impacting the business on a broader basis. You really want to understand the fundamentals. And then if you can follow that up with some thoughtful suggestions for helping do those things, either achieve growth goals or optimize the business one way or another, that's how you're going to start moving. But first you need to uncover, how could you make an impact? And to do that, you have to understand the fundamentals of the business, how things are going, and then bring your brain to that.
Yeah, interesting. So, Bhuvana, what do you think?
Yeah, I can add on to that too. This is actually something Jess and I have talked about in the past as well. One other thing I've done, and I've worked in small company and large company environments, and there have been times in small company environments where the goals are not always clear or they're changing. And so one other thing I have found helpful, just kind of echo Jess's comment about asking questions, is connecting with peers in different teams and asking them questions about the problems they're facing, right? Especially, I've had stints in customer success teams, in product management teams, in program management teams, and engineering teams, and kind of all of these. And I've worked cross-functionally with legal, with finance, with HR, and I've been lucky and fortunate to have a bunch of those opportunities. But also a lot of it has just been me getting out there and talking to my peers and saying, hey, I've talked to a few of the frontline customer success folks, and it seems like this particular problem keeps coming up over and over again with our customers. Is there a way I could help address that, right? Is that can I help facilitate a conversation between the customer success team and a product team? Or I've been talking to these frontline engineers, and there's this issue that keeps coming up in this system. Is that something that maybe we can put some heads together between, site reliability engineers and software engineers and QA engineers, share some ideas back and forth? And so I think being that kind of connector can also really help give, to Lily's earlier point, a cross-functional view, because strategic viewpoints are rarely scoped to one discipline, as she noted. So learning what you can about the other disciplines, I think, can also help you up your strategic game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that gets into something that we had actually chatted about a bit before the panel, which is strategic alliances. So finding your internal champions that you can champion them and they can do the same back to you. So Lily, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, because I definitely have had to do that, to be honest. I wish that you didn't need to, but obviously it's great to have it. But you should definitely seek out internal champions within your company. The first one that you should probably go to is your manager. By definition, their job is to help you, recognize your work and create visibility for you. So they should almost have to be your champion because it's their job. But then you can also seek people both in your team as well as outside your team, and ideally they are actually outside the team, because I feel like that carries a bit more weight when it comes to recognizing your work. But finding those people who are also willing to be like, hey, Lily or Jess, they really did work that contributed to our overall goal, like whether it's an OKR or whatever, but they really contributed to that OKR, like congrats to them, shout out. And that just carries so much more weight than just you speaking for yourself. So yeah, coming from personal experience, getting that crew together to just have each other's back is amazing.
Yeah, and that also, it leads into something else that we were chatting about earlier, but I see it's the top voted question on the Q&A, which is, in terms of speaking to your own strategic contributions, how do you do that without being super boastful? And that is something that all four of us were talking about. So whoever upvoted that question, you are not alone. I was saying to the today that I keep a brag doc, and it's literally called brag doc because I'm super creative. But it's like where I just write down my contributions so I don't forget them, right? Because I forget what I did a month ago. We're a startup and we move fast. So the problem is, though, like, I have that information. How do I talk about myself without feeling awkward or like I'm humble bragging, or, how do you do that? Who wants to tell me how to do that? Jess?
Sure. I like to be a straight shooter. So I think that, I'm in marketing. So number one, if I don't know how to market myself, I'm like not really good at my job. So I have to figure out how to talk about what I'm doing. And I really have to walk the line of doing it in a way that makes my contributions clear, but doesn't come across as bragging or taking credit for other people. So I like to storytell. So I think that, and storytelling often starts with, hey, we're trying to do this. We're trying to increase our visibility. That's part of our strategy. Here's what I've done with my media plan. Here's what I've done with this particular PR campaign. I'm interested in the results here. I think that this went well, but I think this wasn't so great. And I like to paint both sides of what I'm doing well alongside what else I'm doing to do better. And I think that comes across as authentic, trying to get better. You're marketing yourself, but you're also talking about how you're thinking critically about what could be better. So I've marketed myself. I've said I'm not quite there, and here's what my next move is. And I think that's a nice way to talk about your achievements and what you're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bhuvanas?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think definitely tying your contributions to business value is key. And to echo Lily's point too about forming alliances, I have offered to brag for other people. So when I notice someone else doing something great, I will say to them, "Hey, can I send a note to your manager about this and talk about how great your contribution was? Or can I send a note to the executive sponsor of this project that you're working on? How can I help you?" And I often find that comes back to me, right? And I'm a big believer that the energy you put out into the universe comes back to you. So I tend to do that on a regular basis. And so then when someone comes to me, and to your point, Colleen, about the brag doc, I totally keep that too. It's very useful. I try to review it a couple times a year with my manager. So then when, if somebody I've bragged about, if they come to me and say, "Hey, is there something I can talk up about you?" I can quickly pull that up and say, "Yeah, remember this project we worked on a couple months ago and this great result we had? Here it is. Can we talk that up?" And that sometimes helps because yeah, I think the humble brag feels very disingenuous to me. Yeah. But it is something where we do have to talk about that stuff.
Absolutely. And you can't always just leave it for review time either, because then it's too late. And that's not really strategic. That's more about performance. Lily, anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say actually, I think that having a champion is really, really great for that real-time recognition. But also to your point about it being a little bit too late to wait for the review, a strategy that I've actually been able to do successfully is that to help myself also do the peer reviews when it comes time, I've actually been keeping track of accomplishments of my peers as they happen. And so I actually kind of let it write itself over the course of a class. And so I basically have essentially a brag doc of other people that I know for sure I'm going to write a peer review for. And so it's really, really great to do that real-time call out, of course. But when it comes to review time as well, having this long list of things that you can just point to their manager that they did is also really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. So in related news, but also pivoting because I'm seeing questions come in on the Q&A. So I have an engineering background and I'm a pure data nerd, right? And I find that the people who are most successful in technology strategy are often not the best engineers necessarily, but those who balance well between their core function and business acumen. So each of you comes from a different background, but also I've noticed that, in the Q&A, people are saying, how do you stay strategic if you're in a role that's more reactive than proactive? And also strategy is really broad. So for different functions, how do you recommend building business knowledge, especially if you're not, an MBA? And how do you balance execution with strategy? I know that's a very large question, so I'll let you figure out how you want to take it. But Bhuvanas, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start with at least parts of that. I've definitely been in reactive roles before, and it can be really tough to carve out the time to even take a step back and say, how could I restructure this, or how can I make it better so I'm not always reactive? So I will acknowledge that upfront, that can be really difficult. And I saw there was a question in there about doing things outside of work hours. I have done that, and part of it for me is also just being a working parent and sometimes needing flexibility during the day. So I won't go into too much depth there, but I do think that in terms of building the business knowledge, and this is something that I have done when I've been in reactive roles, is as part of the connecting with peers and other functions, right? So I'm a computer science nerd by training, but have moved in other directions in my career. Haven't looked at code in a long time. But one of the things that I always found really interesting was, okay, I'm interested in how product strategy is formed. I'm going to go talk to the product manager. Oh, and it turns out they're using a specific framework on, gathering information about market size and market opportunity, competitive landscape, things like that. Like, oh, that hadn't occurred to me. Let me go read about that, right? And one example there, I mean, Jess will know this stuff much better, but one example there is from the Pragmatic Institute. It's one of the frameworks used by many companies in the industry. So that was really helpful. And then, working more closely with some of the sales folks and figuring out, okay, what's our go-to-market strategy, right? How do we figure out, okay, we have this product, how do we market it and sell it and monetize it, right? And convince customers that they need it, right? And there was a whole value-based selling framework that I was able to discover based on my questioning there. And then when, later on in my career, when I was focused on customer success, and leading a customer success team, it was all about growing our accounts, right? So how do we enable our customers to be successful on our platform and grow with us? So there are some well-known industry models around growth that have to do with a funnel, right? So acquisition, activation, engagement, retention is one of the standard ones. I think it's called youre for the pirates among us. So things like that, finding those types of frameworks and then being able to kind of dig in and say to a peer, hey, can you send me a link? Hey, can you send me a paper? Is there something I can do some further reading? Was really helpful to me.
Yeah, I would say as an extension to that, if there's one thing that you decide to educate yourself on, it would be how do you, what is a go-to-market strategy and what's a go-to-market framework? And so any company you're at, and you can, I think Bhuvanas is right, having a well-rounded perspective of the organization from each function is great. If you are strapped and you're executing and you don't have a ton of time, I would advise just try and focus on that. And there are a lot of older books you can read. Crossing the Chasm is one of them. There's a newer book I like called Play Bigger, which is about category creation. It's really a fancy term for modern go-to-market strategy, where you don't just disrupt an existing category with a new approach. You create a net new category. And so I would read a couple of those books, but if you don't have time for that, go on to HBR and read articles and case studies about other companies that have had great success. Look for models of success and then try and bring that into your organization. Ask questions, find parallels, make suggestions. You don't have to go out and get an MBA, and I say that because I don't have one. But you can self-educate on some of these more strategic aspects and read a lot, and then think about it and think about how you can bring those lessons learned to the table at your business. I also wanted to make one more point on the alliances question earlier and what Bhuvan is talking about with building relationships with other functions. So your manager is your go-to, but I think we've all had managers who maybe didn't quite have our back. And so I think that's a real roadblock that people need to find their way around. And I think that to do that, you do need champions and alliances that are not always your manager. So building your network within the organization. You should try to put an eye towards building up, so leaders of functions, and try to take advantage of opportunities when leaders of functions speak out at company meetings or something goes around the company Slack. Follow up. Like, I was really interested in what you said about the partner strategy. I'd love to contribute. Could you spend 15 minutes with me having coffee and I can learn a little bit more about it? And try to help those people, offer an extension to them I'd like to impact this. I think I can do this. And then as you help them, they'll become sort of indebted to you. You'll build a relationship. And that's a nice way to start building champions and alliances around your manager, which is not a, it's not a threat to your manager. And ideally that relationship is good, but for you to move up, you need multiple champions that are higher up than you in different areas of the business.
Interesting. Yeah. So you need to have champions both across and above you. That makes a lot of sense. So, so Jess, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think probably some of the people here have read about SNS, but do you want to, I'd like to pivot and start talking about what happens when people are biased against you and think that you're not strategic when you're trying very hard to be strategic. So could you give us a little overview of what SNS is?
Yeah. So the first article I published on Medium, it was the second time I wrote it. So I think I was about a year ago inside a different organization. And it had been something I had noticed repeatedly, but in my childbearing years, I was very focused on, all right, this is about maternity leave timeouts, and this is what's preventing women from asking for promotions and raises, and this is the thing. And then I got on the other side of that, and I started looking around at other women who I felt were perfectly qualified to move up, consistently not getting the opportunities. And I would even be in performance review sessions. Let's say this particular company had peer review sessions where people would talk about, is that person getting a promotion and at what level? And so that was a very clear environment where I could understand people's view of what someone was capable of. And so, and you probably worked for other companies where there's these high potential 9-box formats and things like that. So I've had a lot of exposure to people talking about people and their potential. And when I stepped back, I thought, all right, I've been hearing this a lot. I've been hearing she's great at executing, but she's not strategic. And I remember hearing it multiple times. And one time in particular, the woman in question worked for me. And I thought, well, this is bullshit. And I didn't address it in the meeting because naturally I'm surrounded by people who are making the claim. And I felt like I needed to take a step back and try and unpack what was going on there. And as I did that, I started to learn some very valid points about what was creating their perception that she wasn't strategic, and some very invalid points. And so I started in my head thinking, this is at least just as much it as childbearing years and timeouts are, if not maybe more it, preventing women from getting up to that next level, because this perception-based issue is really what people make their decisions on. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily that you've killed it in every performance review you've ever had. It's, do the people above you think you have the capability to be a leader and run a function or contribute at a greater level? Or do they think you're a little bit more myopic and focused on operations? And so as I navigated that company and moving into other roles, I really felt like this was something I wanted to talk about. I had no idea if anyone was going to be interested in this topic. But I, like I said earlier, I had the support of my CEO. He actually read it, he contributed, he edited it. So we had a nice collaboration. Colleen read it and edited it. We had a couple of other people who really helped me shape it up to be something that seemed like it was worth publishing. And from there, I published it, and it's not the most viral thing in the world, but I've had so much great feedback that people felt like I was talking directly to them about their careers that, I'm proud that it's created a conversation that I think is worth us continuing to have so we can unpack this bias issue.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, I think this article, people have very much responded to it positively. Well, positively, they recognize SNS. So Bhuvana and Lily, I'm actually curious, what were your thoughts when you read the article? And do you feel like you've been diagnosed with SNS or you've seen this happen to others?
Yeah, definitely. 100% without doubt. It resonated right away. And I actually had read that harrowing account from Francois from Pinterest right before that. And so it was kind of a back-to-back deep soul searching kind of day. And yeah, it struck a chord. But I think outside of the points that Jess has already raised, I feel like the importance of articles like this and accounts by Francois like hers, it's really important because when I finished reading it, I realized that women in my own circles really try their best to not attribute failure that they experience with any type of systematic bias, because it kind of implies that there's nothing they can do about it, right? It's kind of outside your control. And so they kind of just, we kind of do this thing where we kind of just assume that it's something that we can do better and we soldier on. And so I really took away from that article that no, there are improvements on both sides. Jess had bulleted out literally how to improve either as a leader or as someone who's trapped. And so I just wanted to recognize that point. You know, there's a lot that is working against you, and there's definitely a lot that you can do about it, but also recognize that it's not 100% always on you. There's a systematic impact happening here, and you should definitely give yourself some slack if you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like imposter syndrome plays into this as well. I would definitely, calling back to the last She Geeks Out panel I moderated on imposter. Bhuvanas, what were your thoughts when you read it?
Yeah, it definitely resonated with me. Like I said, the points about making your strategic contributions known that we've previously covered, you know, up leveling your presentation. That's definitely coaching I've given to multiple people. You know, start with the punchline. I think that a lot of times I know I fall into this trap where I feel like I need to present all of my supporting material first before I tell people my conclusion. And unfortunately, a lot of times people have already tuned you out. So, and starting with punchline means that you get that information out first, and then you can provide the supporting material if people are looking for it. But I used to tell mentees, and I still do to this day, when you're talking to, especially an executive, but really anybody, present, you know, think of 3 bullet points, just 3 bullet points, and say those 3 things, and then pause. Because it might just be that you've already landed your point and you don't need to present any of your supporting material. So that part definitely resonated with me. And the bias too. I was just talking to an executive about this yesterday. Leadership behaviors show up very differently based on factors like gender, ethnicity, you know, your training, your background, whether it's technical or non-technical, all these types of things. And the specific example we discussed is many organizations have a leadership behavior or principle around accountability, right? Hold yourself and your teams to a high bar, right? You expect a lot out of them. And sometimes people fall short, right? And part of holding them accountable is saying, you know, hey, I expected X and you didn't deliver. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed some male leaders doing that in group meetings or in forums where, you know, it can come across as a bit of a reprimand. And earlier in my career, I would try to emulate that. You know, okay, I'm going to hold this person, to take them to task in a group meeting. And I got feedback that I was too assertive or too aggressive, and which is infuriating. And to Lily's point, it's really frustrating. They think that it's systemic bias, but it is. And so I had to adjust and say, okay, I'm going to do that behind the scenes, right? I'll hold them accountable behind the scenes. We'll course correct. Things will get better and people will notice. And then that goes back to Jess's other point about making your strategic contributions known. Sometimes you do that course correcting and nobody notices. And so then you have to say, okay, I've done this behind the scenes so that I don't come across as assertive or too aggressive. But then I still have to tell somebody that I did that work and that it's a strategic contribution that resulted in more value. So it's unfortunately extra work, but that's how I've navigated it.
That's so interesting. It's such a key. It's such a key to learn that balance. And Jess has said this a few times to me, just when we were talking about various things. But knowing when not to raise your hand is just as important as knowing when to raise your hand. Jess, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think in my earlier phase of my career, I was very focused on volunteerism, and there was nothing that I wouldn't try to put my hand up for to help. And it could have been planning an office party, or it could have been, working on a report for an analyst when I was at Forrester. So there wasn't anything I didn't want to put my hand up for early. And then as I got into leadership, kind of was approaching it and getting into it, I realized that I had a new set of responsibilities, and that spirit of volunteerism was A, taking me away from executing on my core job, and B, not getting me any further in many cases, and so I had to think about it, take a step back, and I came up with this concept of strategic volunteerism. So if I were to raise my hand, it was because it was getting me visibility with someone above me, and it was a high value activity. And if it wasn't one of those two things, my hand would stay down, and I would just let there be uncomfortable silence, because people were used to me volunteering. So I had to reset their expectations and make space for myself to volunteer in ways that were going to grow my career.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we probably all felt that way. I know I have. I call it the team mom trap, like becoming the mom, and the soccer mom in me definitely falls into that. Lily, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that Jess just said. I was nodding my head so hard. I was like, yes, that's so true. Because there's so much that you can do to put yourself out there. And it's funny because I literally had a talk with my manager today about how I'm doing so far, and he said, you do a really good job of building communities inside the company, but ultimately that's not my job. We're here to assess how well I'm doing at my job, and that's a really nice thing to have, but that's I want to hear more about how I'm contributing to the company objective and how I'm hitting metrics, right? And so I totally agree. I should definitely be recognized for that kind of work, but if it comes to making trade-offs and having to pick a lane, I definitely need to be a little bit more strategic about which ones I pick.
There's that word again. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. And this gets into one of my final questions, which I also see in the Q&A. In the Q&A, it's phrased as, can you be strategic on a team that is not interested in being strategic? And what signs do you look at to tell if a team or company is truly strategic? And the way I is also, how can you tell if you're going to be able to break out of a non-strategic position if you've gotten yourself into that, being the team cheerleader, being the team mom position, and getting into the situation where you volunteered for everything? How can you break out of that? Or how do you know if it's time to just move on to a different position? And then in related questions, somebody else offered, how can you make that clear on your resume that you want to be more strategic? So Bhuvana, thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there in that question for sure. I'll tackle the latter part of it first, in terms of how do you show that you're strategic on your resume. And I think it ties back a lot to what we've talked about earlier around business value, right? The projects you worked on, how do they contribute to the business, right? Did you help increase revenue? Did you help increase customer satisfaction? Did you help decrease costs? Did you help reduce operational complexity? All of these things, right? And as you're working on projects, thinking about those types of factors, right? If you can't tie your work to something like that, you kind of have to question, why am I doing this project? And it's a totally valid question to ask your manager too, right? Why are we doing this project? And sometimes it's just because, it has to be done because it's, a government regulation or whatever. I've definitely had those kinds of projects in the past. But I think really tying it to business value is really important. In terms of being strategic or trying to be strategic on a team that's not interested in being strategic, I think a lot of that comes back to what you want out of your career, right? I think at the start of this session, we noted there are folks who are on operational teams who are great at optimizing those operations, and that's valuable to the company. And it's, even if it's tactical or reactive, it's still really valuable, and that's fine. But if you do find yourself thinking, hey, I wish I could do something more proactive, I wish I could be part of a decision-making conversation, I think that's when you look around and say, okay, is there another role at this company where I can do more of that or get involved in that? Or is it time to move on?
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I noticed Lily is nodding a lot. So, Lily, what are your thoughts?
I was going to say there's actually this fantastic method of measuring your impact at review time, essentially. But of course, you can do this anytime. There's basically two axes you can almost think of your work as being the whether it's direct versus indirect, and then also the reach that that impact has. And so a lot of people worry that they're not strategic as if their work falls under the non-direct path, and then also with very little reach. And so if you kind of plot all your work as you go through the quarter that way, and you kind of see that it kind of remains in that quadrant, that's when I would say maybe reevaluate the work that you're doing and see if you can get out of that quadrant, right? Like, are you able to work on something that is more direct, or in other words, more measurable almost, because KPIs are measurables. And so if you can measure it, almost always is direct. Or if if your role is naturally providing a little bit more of an indirect, difficult to measure impact, then maybe you can talk to your team about whether you can pick up things with more reach, rather than just impacting your team. Can you impact the org? Can you impact people outside the business somehow? Just like extend the reach. So I think that that's just a really good way to plot your work, and then just make sure you have a good spread throughout.
Oh, Lily, I love it. Turning your work into data. That's my game, man. I love it. I'm in. I'm going to start doing that right now. Put it all into Excel. It'll be great. Jess, what are your thoughts on that? Oh, you're muted.
Right. How's that? So I think to your question around if you were known for volunteering and you're in the team mom role, which I have been also, you have to take a this, not that approach. And so when someone comes to you for, can you do this, blah, 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 you got to say, this is what I'm focused on. I've taken on this extra project and I'm really excited about it. It's strategic. I don't have time for that. and just keep it simple, because we find that we feel like we need to explain things more than we actually do. And so I think, I'm doing extras. It's on this big thing. And so therefore somebody else can do that. And move on. And, I think that's okay. I think people understand that. Yeah. And I like the idea of, data driven. How do I get to what is going to be more impactful? How do I attach to that? I think if you're on a team that's not strategic, you need to talk to your manager and figure out how are you impacting the business, and figure out, can you find a way to change the perception of your team or your own perception of your work? And if not, and if you want to move, then that's just a catalyst for figuring out how to move on to a different team, different function. And there are a lot of ways to map into different functions too. So I think if you want to be strategic and you are not on a strategic team, and the manager doesn't give a shit about strategy or being impactful or showing the value of your team, you got to get out to move your career.
Yeah, totally agree. Side note, we're hiring. So one question that was in the chat that I really enjoyed was, how do you stay strategic while being in a role or environment that's more reactive than proactive? So I guess that's a question of the company strategy, the organization strategy. Lily, you're nodding a lot. What are your thoughts?
Going to say, from the design world, we call that vision-led versus almost growth-led, because growth is basically going from, let's do as many experiments as possible and micro optimize these tiny little things. And so that is being pretty reactive. And then proactive is, regardless of experiments, regardless of how people react to the things that we put out there, we have a vision that we're carrying forward. And so as long as we stick to that vision, we believe it will work. And so, yeah, I'm nodding a lot because I've worked in both of those organizations, and I definitely believe you can be strategic at both. Because at the end of the day, whether you are working from top down or bottom up, there's still a path between where you are and what the company's trying to achieve. And as long as you build your work towards making that path, that's in my eyes being strategic. I don't know if that answers the question.
Totally. And I think bringing data into it too is important. Like being able to tie your role back to numbers and be like, I drove this and this made this much money for the company, that kind of thing. Bhuvanas, what do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say I was thinking through this and how to kind of move from that reactive to proactive. I know it can definitely be tough, and I think some of it is looking at, okay, if we're constantly reacting, are there themes in the types of things we're reacting to, right? Are there recurring themes? And I've worked with support teams where they say, hey, we're answering the same question over and over again. Let's put a knowledge base article out there, and then we can just direct people to that, right? Or I've worked with, customer success teams where, customers complaining customers are complaining about something that becomes a recurring theme. Okay, how can we funnel that feedback over to the product team? So I think, as much as possible, which is tough in a reactive mode, but as much as possible, it's kind of taking a step back and looking for those recurring themes and categorizing them and helping direct those through the organization can be really helpful and can be a strategic contribution.
I love it. I love it. So I think we're at 6:30, so I just want to be conscious of time. So to wrap it up, I'm going to ask if you had to take one action. Oh, Rachel disappeared. If you could suggest one action that someone could take to become more strategic, whether it's read more HBR articles or, find your internal champions. Maybe I just stole two of the good ones, but what would you suggest for people? Jess, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would ask, as high up as you can go, what are the main ways we're trying to grow, and what are our barriers to growth, and why? I would try to parse that out, and you might have to ask that over several conversations, but try to understand the levers of the business, how they're trying to grow, and what are the challenges and why, and you'll have a good foundation for thinking about how you can contribute.
Love it. Love it. Lily, what about you?
I think very similar to what Jess already said, but basically, how when you were a child and you kind of pester your parents with asking why all the time, like you'd be like, why is this way? And then why is that? Why is that? You just kind of keep building onto each other. I also come from a computer science background, so I like to say, I like to call it the recursive why. And so just keep asking why about something until you hit the bottom, So that is absolutely my number one thing. I ask everybody why, obnoxiously, but it's so helpful.
So what you're saying is my 6-year-old is super strategic. Love
Absolutely.
It. Awesome. Bhuvanas.
Yeah, I think as much as we've talked through some really great tips here, I think that for me, what it has boiled down to is being strategic has a specific meaning inside of each organization. And so to Jess's point about, asking about barriers to growth and things like that, the other advice I've given to mentees and to peers and I've taken to heart myself is ask other people around you, almost do an informal 360 feedback and say, hey, am I perceived as strategic? And it's interesting. It's interesting what kinds of answers come back, or I've even framed it differently and said to peers, to managers, to people who report to me, what 3 words would you use to describe me, just off the top of your head? And that's a really interesting exercise because it can reveal to you that whether what you think you're putting out there is actually what people perceive of you. And whether that's strategic or not, whether it's I think that can be incredibly valuable. We all have blind spots where we're concerned, right? We can't see how other people perceive us. So doing that kind of informal 360 feedback has been super helpful for me through my career.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you. I have one more I want to add. Can I add one more?
You may add one more.
Someone commented to me that they liked the article and they felt like the challenge was that women are over mentored and under sponsored. And I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think it's dead on. And if there's another one thing you can do, it's find a way to move beyond mentorship and seeking so much feedback, and find a champion who can sponsor you and work that relationship.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.